So what helps to determine whether stationary bandits will adopt this or that form, a non-democracy or democracy? One explanation lies in societal evolution. And so some have looked at the role of historical structures and institutions as a determinant, and more in particular, if you're reading that for this particular semester. Feudalism, for instance, inherently limited the power of the crown or the incumbent, right? It created immunity for certain privileged groups. There was an independent nobility there, which gave them the right to resist unjust authority. Remember that the British Magna Carta did very little for the peasants, but it created enormous room for action on the part of those higher up on the social totem pole, really at the highest levels, the nobility. It also gave birth, very slowly, to the modern parliamentary system, which served to check the monarch and involved more and more and more actors over time, eventually going all the way down to the commoners. Feudal systems are not static. Demographic evolution can help create a group of mobilizable masses, urbanites. More specifically, urbanization brings peasants in from the cities. And in the process of urbanization, those peasants are removed from the various institutions that held them down when they were way out in the countryside. The social norms of behavior, for example, including deference to authority. The lack of social solidarity structures. People living in isolated places found it very hard to rally, to come together. And also the heavy hand of the authorities. It was much easier to keep tabs over the local population if they were living under these various lords on these estates. So all these things disappear with urbanization. Now the best chance for change is where there are common goals between town dwellers and rural inhabitants in order to create a solid cross-country front. This is the best chance of democratization. And so independent commercial agriculture can actually help to do this by turning peasant farmers from subsistence or production for that lord to big commercial ones. Either big commercial ones or smaller commercial ones, but ones that have a commercial relationship. And then the landed upper class, the lords of the manors, have much more trouble creating coalitions with the bourgeois against the peasants and workers. The peasants and workers become much stronger relatively. So what we're talking about here is development. In the city, increasing the percent of urbanized population. And in the country, increasing the independence of rural inhabitants through these two different processes. Urbanization and changing the nature of the countryside through commercialization, commercial agriculture. The fact is there's a strong relationship between development and democratic regimes. Diamond finds that 83% of high-income states were more democratic, or at least more competitive regimes than the rest. Moreover, if you actually substitute gross national product in place of HDI, which includes literacy rate, life expectancy, gross domestic product, then all 20 of the most developed countries are among the most democratic in the world. The outstanding question then is, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Does development lead to democracy, or does democracy simply survive better in the more developed states? So modernization theory, according to modernization theory, development leads to democracy. Because as you have development, you've got more and more complex social structures, more skilled and active and autonomous labor, for example. And then you have the emergence of new interest groups, civil society. The result is that the system can no longer be effectively run by command. People demand a greater say in the system. This is an endogenous explanation. Democracy arises from the system that precedes it, hence the endogeneity, it's internal. An important part of the modernization narrative is the urbanization-education linkage. Urbanization, by increasing education, has a direct impact on democratization. People learn about their rights and they want more. People learn what it takes to make good policies and they want more say, etc., etc. This is a transformation of political culture. But there's also an indirect impact, because it gives expanded opportunities for media development, meaning quick transfer of information. As more and more people can read, the media has more people to cater to. It also gives rise to civil society, chess clubs, reading clubs, all these sorts of things. As people become more educated, they get involved in these things. Tocqueville called these large free schools, where political interests emerge and various strategies evolve. And then they can check other non-state institutions and state institutions as well. This is what we mean by civil society. So education gives rise to this civil society. In other words, a key reason economic development facilitates democracy is that it helps transform political culture and civil society and state society relations. But it's important to remember that it doesn't have to always do this. In large part, this is a function of control. If non-democratic leaders can manage an initial bump in demand for democracy, they may find long-term stability in economic growth. So non-democrats can actually profit from the economic growth instead of being threatened by it. In other words, if you can control the population long enough in the short run, they may cave in or even become beholden to you in the long run. And the empirical evidence suggests that there's this more nuanced version. And it's what we call this inverted U that you see here, where you've got instability on the y-axis, or stability on the y-axis. I should have labeled it right here. And then income level on the x-axis. So you have dictatorships where you've got stable dictatorships, I should say, where you've got low income, right? People don't have the resources that modernization theory says they need in order to rival the state. But as that income rises, there we go, you've got increased uncertainty. And at a certain level, increased instability, at a certain level, this right up here, this leads to pressures for democratization. So at this climax up here. But beyond that level, if non-democratic elites manage to maintain control up here, up at the top, then after that, it becomes more in the population's interest to maintain those elites. It actually, I guess, not necessarily more in the population's interest, but more on the side of the dictatorship. The dictatorship becomes more stable the more affluent it is. And people then, therefore, support the dictatorship more than they had before. So development doesn't necessarily lead to the collapse of these non-democratic regimes. It can actually strengthen them. If people over here see that they're getting by better and better thanks to the non-democrats in power, they're going to support those non-democrats in power, or they're not going to have as much of an interest to oppose them at least. So high levels of economic development, what this means, seem to make any regime type more stable. The bourgeois middle class can actually support non-democrats under conditions of social polarization and threats like we saw in Latin America in the 1970s, where the middle class actually supported the dictatorships of people like Augusto Pinochet. Rapid economic development, though, under these authoritarian leaders can decrease this polarization and over time make rulers less desired and lead to this peak that we just talked about. So we'll stop there and go on to another set of slides.